So as you guys know, I've always been a big fan of ironwork. But to me, iron has always been something that you either buy from a store or maybe forage if you are really good at scavenging. But I've always had a fascination with where iron comes from. And so I wanted to actually take you guys on a journey, not just to show you where it comes from, or one way that you can make it happen, but also give you a tutorial on how you can do it yourself. Because I, like many of, I'm sure you guys have, spent quite a bit of time watching YouTube videos on people who smelt iron from ore. And one of the most frustrating things about it is that I can't find anybody who's given a definitive tutorial on how to do it. So I have spent the last couple of months deeply researching this topic, and not just on how to do it with modern convenience, but how it was done back in the days when it used to be a normal part of life. So for the ore that we're using in my video, I'm using these ironstone, which are the bane of farmers' existence everywhere. And we'll get to that later, but first we need to talk about how we're actually going to go about doing this and how you can too. So there was a time in history when making iron the way that we're going to be in this series of videos was sort of a daily part of life. And the reality of medieval blacksmiths was that not many of them had a commission to actually have a permanent forge and sort of work as part of a keep or a castle. That was only the lucky really got to do that. Most of them were traveling blacksmiths. They'd have a wagon, they'd have a mule or a horse, and all of their gear would go with them, which meant that sometimes they would buy their iron, but that was very expensive. What they would often do is make it themselves, literally on the road from the materials at hand. And they would even produce their own charcoal. We're not going to be going quite that far in this video, but there's an excellent video I can link here of how medieval smiths would have been able to produce their own charcoal in small batches. But for this video, we're going to be getting back to our roots and using nothing but sand and clay and ash and charcoal and wood to make iron that we can use to forge. And the first thing we need to look for are some green saplings, which is why I'm out here, out in the open air away from my workshop where you're used to seeing me, to harvest some green saplings. So the saplings that we got, green saplings specifically, because green saplings are much more flexible, are going to be used to build a sort of scaffolding structure, like a cage, that will dictate the size and shape of our foundry. And we'll use that to build the walls of the clay walls of the foundry around, and it'll help hold its structure while it dries. During the firing of the kiln that we're making, or the foundry that we're making, all of that's going to burn away, but the holes inside the structure that it leaves, carbonized holes, are going to actually make the clay act as even more of a refractory, because it sort of has air channels through it. So it not only is it helpful in the process of building it using fresh clay, but it's also going to help keep it together. But now that we've got the saplings, we need to actually get our clay. So where do we get clay? Now, in the historical context, when we're talking about clay, they don't actually use, or didn't actually use, pure clay very often, especially traveling blacksmiths. They would use clay-sodden earth. And so that's kind of what we're going to be doing. So there will be impurities in it. There will be soil and silt and various other things, but it will be predominantly clay. And you're going to find that near bodies of water. You'll find it elsewhere as well, but bodies of water are a good place to check. And you can tell that the soil around you is starting to get very clay-like with a little hint, and I'll show you. Here in the ground, we can actually start seeing cracks forming on what is a nice sunny day, dry weather. And these cracks will form because while soil moves and shifts with weather changes, clay expands when it's wet and contracts when it's dry. So when it starts getting hot and dry, you start seeing these spiderweb cracks through the ground, and that's a good indicator that you are near clay. And in our case, we're near one of the dams on the property that I live on. So let's head down there and find us some clay. And as predicted, near the shore, we have these perfectly even crack systems forming in what is almost pure clay. Actually, I was having a look. There's a bit of silt in it, there's a little bit of soil, but really it's quite plastic. And what I mean by plastic is if I take a bit and break it, I can squeeze it in my hand and it holds its shape. And if I compress it down, get rid of some of the moss and lichen and things in there, get a nice clean bit, and I knead it like this, I should be able to break it fairly cleanly and get a nice clean snap. And the cleaner that snap, the higher the clay content's going to be. So we're going to grab some of this, I think. Big shout out to my mate Alan, who has a excavator and helped me dig out this, because for the size smelt that I'm going to teach you how to do, which is about as small as you realistically want to do in this type of smelt, because getting too small, you can't generate enough heat to make it work. So there is a minimum size that you have to go, and we're going to do the minimum, hoping to get between 3 and 5 kilos of iron. In order to do that, you're going to need to build a foundry that is going to use about 1/4 meter of clay. Really, it's going to be about 200,000 cubic centimeters. So if you think of a cubic meter, things are usually done in cubic meters when you're dealing with earthen stuff. You want about 1/4 to 1/5 of a meter of clay or clay sodden soil. So if you're buying your clay rather than foraging it, that's what you're going to need. It's a lot, but it's manageable by one person. I'm just very lucky and grateful that I have a friend with an excavator. Now, not everybody's going to be lucky enough to have as convenient a clay source as I have here. If you need help finding wild clay that you've got to do a bit more processing with and things like that, I highly recommend Andy's videos. Andy? Yeah, he does incredible work showing how to find and work with and process wild clays. Now, clay on its own is going to do that expansion and contraction thing when you try and dry it, which is going to lead to all sorts of cracking. So you need to do what's called tempering. For that, all you need is sand. Lots and lots of sand. You can just get this at any hardware store or go to the beach with a bucket, but you're going to need a fair amount of it. Another thing you're going to need is some wood ash, just ash left over from a fire, preferably a hardwood fire, and straw, which I have around the paddock edges here. Means that I don't have to go buying a bale of straw. When it comes to your straw, any dead grasses will just be fine. All this is going to do is get chopped up and added into your clay mixture to add a little bit of extra structure by adding some fibers. So I'm going to gather up a whole bunch of this and chop it up into small pieces. So what we need to do next is a very important step, and I know you're probably going to be excited and want to get straight to building your kiln, but you can't do that. You need to make a test brick. And the test brick is going to show you whether or not the mix that you've got, the quality of the clay soil and the various additives and your ratios is good. So what you want to do is gather enough to make just a small brick of your mixture. And I'll show you what it looks like in the tray. Let's get this out into a tray. Nice. So I've got clay, about 20% of that volume of clay is sand, and then probably half of that again is ash, and then a good bunch of these chopped up about 1.5 inches long, maybe 2 inches, some of them. There's no particular rule there, but just short but not too short of our straw. And we're going to knead all of that together thoroughly. While we're kneading, we're going to take any rocks or pebbles or anything that might be in the clay and getting rid of those. Same with our ash. If there's any little lumps of charcoal or wood in there or something, it's going to be problematic. We want to get rid of any lumps and make it as smooth as possible, and then form it into a brick. So through getting our hands very dirty, we should make a nice neat brick, about yay big, more or less. And we want to leave that in the sun to dry. You can put it low and slow in your oven, but I mean really low and really slow. You want to dry this in open air for as long as you can. It's going to firm up quite a bit, but not fully set. And that's the thing. We can't fire this while it's still got this much moisture in it. So leave it in the sun for, I'm talking like 2 to 3 days if you can, and let it fully cure that way before we try and fire it. So we're going to do that with this one. You can speed the process along with a heat gun. Just make sure you are rotating it regularly so that all sides get dried. Now you can speed this along a little bit by having a very small fire and maintaining a very small fire and keeping your brick close enough to the fire that you could keep your hand there without burning it, but no closer than that. If you put your hand in front of it and it's too hot to hold there, you're too close. But keeping it there, rotating it to make sure that all sides get heated and dried through, this can significantly speed up the process. Or you could use an electric heat gun, but setting fires is always more fun. If you're using a fire, this is something you really want to monitor. You don't want to get it too close. You see, my fire ended up growing while I was away, and it got too close and started cracking, which you can see there. So I moved it away, and you can see the steam escaping from it. You don't want that steam escape to be too aggressive, because that means it's too hot. So you want it to be nice and slow. Just be patient with it. Once it's dry, we can fire it, but until that point, we need to dry it out. Otherwise, firing it will just make it explode. So while our test brick is curing, we need to plan our site. Now, the site is going to be very important because you're going to be committed to that site for the next 2 to 3 weeks, at least. So you want to pick a good place that's going to get plenty of sunlight, be out of any direct wind, because direct wind is going to mess with your curing process just so badly. Just avoid it. Or be in a place where you can actually allow these things to happen, like build wind breaks and whatnot to protect it from wind. But this is going to be the place where you build your foundry. And the foundry is going to conform to very specific dimensions, which I'm going to give you in a minute. But all we're doing at the moment is just going to be clearing a site. So the first thing we're going to do is to scrape away any grass that's there and leave bare soil in a square that's going to be around 3 feet by 3 feet, or about 1 meter by 1 meter. Because our foundry is going to have an internal diameter at the base of 30 centimeters, so about 1 foot. And the walls are going to be 12 to 15 centimeters, what's that, like just under half a foot thick. So that means we need about 2 foot across and a little bit of working room, a little bit of wiggle room. Now the base is going to be very important because it needs to be shaped a very specific way. So we clear our area, and what we want to do is we want to dig a trench that is the shape of essentially a lollipop like this, with a mound in the middle. So kind of like a donut, where the outside diameter of that donut is the inside diameter of our foundry. So about 1 foot, 30 centimeters. And this donut here is going to be raised in the middle and about level with the surrounding earth. So all of this is going to be trench, and everywhere else is going to be ground level. Now the way this gets tricky is that you need that trench to be lower at this point than it is at this point. So it needs to be, instead of being, if that's ground level, down from ground level, it needs to be tilted. And the reason for this trench is because our bloom is going to form, hopefully, on this mound in the center. And all of the slag and impurities are going to flow into this channel. And we want to be able to direct that flow down to the drainage port that we're going to build into our foundry. And that drainage port needs to be lower here than it is up here to encourage the flow of the hopefully very liquid slag. So that's what we're going to be doing next while our test brick is firing up. We're going to dig away to bare earth, a patch that's about 1 meter by 1 meter. Then we're going to dig our little donut, leaving the mound in the center, and put the trench running out from it. We can extend the trench later, but we just need it to go from the center of our square to the edge of our square for now. So you can kind of get a sense here, cleared an area, and there's our tilted channel. And at the top of the channel is a clearing that I've made sure is free of any debris, and that's where we're going to build our sapling framework, and that will give us idea of dimensions, etc., and know where to put our central mound in our donut shape. So the scaffold that we're going to be building is going to be kind of like verticals like this, and we're going to wrap rings around it, almost like a tomato cage. So the inside shape of our foundry when it's built is going to be a circle 30 centimeters in diameter at the bottom, and a circle 20 to 25 centimeters at the top, with straight sides, with an overall height of around 90 centimeters. That's our internal size. Our walls are going to be about 12 centimeters thick all the way around, all the way up. So if we want our structure to be in the middle of our walls, then we need to make the diameter of our bottom ring be 30 centimeters plus 12 centimeters, because it's an extra 6 on either side to get into the center. So 42 centimeters at the bottom most one, and at the topmost one is going to be 32 centimeters. So we'll make those two rings first, and then we can affix our verticals between them, and then wrap our other central ones, and that will create our cage. So, as lopsided and wonky as this is just a bit of structural support when we build the clay up, and we'll build the clay actually around the structure. So by doing this, we are essentially being able to see how big our foundry is going to be. So it's be about 90 centimeters tall, about 3 feet, and about 1.5 feet across, I guess. It's not a big one. This is about as small as you could make them be. Now we have this template, we can actually start shaping the base to be what we need it to be. So this kind of gives you a better idea of what we're working with. Even though the scaffold looks quite rickety, it is quite straight down inside. And with the clay there, you can see very clearly our mound, which is not a full dome, it's just raised and slightly domed on top. We have our drainage channel, which runs into a trench here, and it is higher at the back than at the front, so that anything that falls in there will flow down this way. And we've got a gap at the front, which will be our tapping arch eventually. We'll get to that in the next round. But this is just to set the foundation and to bury the legs of our scaffold so that it stays nice and straight. keeping it straight like that is pretty essential. So we will leave this foundation to fully dry, air dry, and I'll aid its drying by putting some very small fires near it as well. Maybe use a heat gun to dry it out, and that will help lock those legs in place completely. So at this stage in the build, like, these look like the beginnings of walls, and that's because they are, but really they're the foundations of what your walls will be built on. At this point, we need to ensure two things. One is the consistency of our wall thickness, and the other is our archway. You can see we've got a bit of our scaffolding showing across there. Once this is cured, we can snip that and it's fine. There will be an archway here, and you want that archway to be about 12 to 15 centimeters wide and about 12 to 15 centimeters high, preferably with a curved top because that's much more structurally sound. Building a little wooden preform to hold that doorway's shape will be a really good idea at this point. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to make a couple of wooden tools that are going to make this process go very smoothly. So we're going pretty low tech here. This is a little gap meter that is 12 centimeters across, which is the wall thickness we want to get to. We can actually see we've got a little bit extra to add. Not much, only a couple of centimeters thickness. But as we move around, we can make sure that we keep a consistent wall thickness this way, all the way up. And each layer that we add can also be as thick as the walls, as tall as the walls are thick. And we can measure that with this simple tool and keep consistency as we build the tower. The other simple mold that we're going to do is our door. So that will fit in there once we're able to get rid of that. Because once this ring is dry, we'll be able to cut this out, fit this in place, and build over the top of it. Okay, so after building my impromptu clay working station, we are more or less ready with the footings. And a good tip is to continue to look down the center and make sure that it's still straight and central, because if you look at this from the side, it looks all wonky because we've used natural branches which aren't perfectly straight. The trick is looking down the barrel. So that's looking good. Looking down from the top, you'll also see inconsistencies in thickness, but we can now use our tool to see that we are more or less consistent thickness all the way around. Now, you're going to probably naturally want to aim for perfection here, but this isn't about perfection. This is about keeping things more or less consistent, and that's it. One little pro tip here, working with clay, you're going to get it all over your hands. Keep a bucket of water and a towel handy, and you can just wash your hands off in the bucket of water and dry them off quickly, because you'll have to go between working with clay and then working with other things back and forth a bit, especially in the early stages. So this just makes life a whole lot easier. So now we have to let this foundation layer dry and dry well, which is why we did our test brick. I already know this mix works, which is why I'm sort of barreling ahead with it, but we'll go over to the test brick and start looking at that soon. Normally this would just be sort of allowed to air dry naturally in sort of historical context. Since I'm doing this for a YouTube video, I'm sort of time strapped, so I'm speeding up the process. What I've got is a steel drum and a heat gun blowing into it, just on low. And that steel drum will actually capture that heat, that hot air, and hold it in there, creating sort of like a low and slow oven. And I'll just do that at intervals throughout the day, just for 15-20 minutes at a time, maybe 3 times a day, spaced out as far as I can to help set that foundation layer before I go moving on to putting another layer on. Of course, we're making our foundry, and I know I'm bouncing around the nomenclature for this thing a lot, I'm sorry, but we're building this one out of clay sodden earth to keep it, to show you how it used to be done, like keep it authentic, show it the medieval way of doing it, so to speak, in terms of materials and structure. But you don't have to use clay. If you know, clay is free if you know where to look. But if you have some money to throw at it, you could quite literally stack up refractory bricks, making sure that it tapers inwards towards the top a little bit, and use hard castable refractory cement as your mortar between the bricks, and that would work just fine. You could also use something like a steel drum and line it with isowool and then hard castable refractory. That would also work. If you are willing to throw some money at it, you can make this a lot easier on yourself. I just wanted to show you how they used to do it way back in the day. And because I know a lot of armchair smelters are going to be telling me, you're doing it wrong. There are lots of different ways from history in the Iron Age that this was done. Some of them used bellows to actually force air through. Some of them were called like an updraft style, where they just relied on natural airflow. Some of them were actually quite small, but didn't produce blooms. They produced something called prills, which are just basically tiny little pea-sized pebbles of iron. So there's lots of different ways it was done. I'm kind of homogenizing them all just to show you sort of an overview of, a medieval process for creating iron rather than any one specific method from one specific culture. So before you go running to the comments to tell me how that's not medievally accurate, just know that I don't care. I'm just showing a bit of history. This is some experimental archaeology for fun and enjoyment and nothing else. You don't have to build your smelter by the light of a full moon, but I'm sure it can't hurt. But while this dries, which is going to take a very long time, I figured we would break this process up into a series of videos so that each one is sort of less than half an hour long, rather than doing one exceptionally long video, because otherwise this is going to be like a Lord of the Rings film on how to do this. So I get so many complaints when my videos are too long. So this will be the end of part one. Part two will be once both the test brick and the foundations are dry and cured, ready for either firing in case of the test brick or the next layer to be added in the case of the foundations. And in that session we'll also be forming the archway, which is pivotal. You absolutely have to have that archway in there. It has to be good and solid. So we'll come back when all of that's ready to go, probably tomorrow or the day after, and continue the series with part two. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for my patrons for making this sort of thing possible. And thank you, Kevin, for booking this particular commission, because this is a lot of hard work, as you can see, but also a lot of fun. See you later.